Now we return to the root of what's forced millions from their homes, the conflict in Syria. With multiple factions and common enemies in play, the war has become even more complicated as Russia now steps up its support for Syrian President Bashar al-Assad by moving additional military men and weaponry into Syria and expanding its base there. Meanwhile, Moscow is calling for greater coordination with the U.S. to fight a common enemy, the Islamic State group. Joining me now to help us sort through some of this latest tangle is Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Margaret Warner. So, Margaret, where does this proposal or this talk about having joint U.S.-Russia talks stand tonight?
Well, Gwen, even though there's been no official announcement, in fact, you could say the military-to-military talks have already begun. Last Friday, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter had a conversation 50 minutes with his counterpart. And this had been after 18 months in which the Obama administration had cut off all contacts after Russia seized Ukraine, or certainly seized Crimea. So the question they're trying to figure out, okay, publicly they're saying, the U.S. is saying, well, these are deconfliction talks. Make sure that our planes don't interfere with each other, we don't have an accident. That is part of it, but really what they want to know is what is Assad's intention here? And is it to prop up the Assad government? The Russians' intention is to prop up the Assad government, or in fact, is it just to fight ISIS, which is what Kerry has been told by Lavrov?
Is this just old Cold War suspicion, or do we have reason to be worried that this is more than what Russia says it is?
Well, that's exactly, and the administration will admit this. They do not want to be gamed, as several said to me, the way they were in Ukraine, where President Putin and the foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, consistently, in the U.S. view, lied not only to them on the phone, face-to-face, but lied to the world about whether they were in Ukraine and what they were doing in Ukraine. And so this time they didn't want to be sucked into that. They also want to make sure, if his intention is to help Assad fight ISIS, and they adopt Assad's view, which is everybody opposed to me is a terrorist, well, the U.S. doesn't want to get sucked into that kind of endeavor or that kind of partnership.
I can understand that, but I just don't see how do face-to-face talks mean that they'll tell the truth or that they'll get the truth.
Excellent point, Gwen, because Kerry has already had 3 conversations with Lavrov. Based on what happened in Ukraine, there's no guarantee they'll be told the truth. And the interventions with Lavrov on the phone have so far not slowed the Russian advance of weapons and material and men into Syria.
Is there any worry or concern that part of the deal, if Lavrov were to talk to Kerry or if Putin were to talk to the president,
which might happen next week,
in New York, is there any concern that the trade-off might be keeping Assad in power?
Oh, yes. And in fact, in London just this weekend, Secretary Kerry said, well, that essentially that Assad could be part of the transition. Now, when you ask why the turnaround, the administration officials told me there's no turnaround. If you were at the Geneva Syria peace talks, 18 months ago as I was, or you read the clips, which I read again today, Kerry's tone was absolutely hard and fast. There is no role for President Assad, even in this transition phase. Yesterday, or this weekend, Kerry said, well, we're not obdurate about that as to time and place.
And why the change? So there was a change,
but
why?
There is definitely a change. Because, for 2 reasons. One, there's an urgency to get something going on the political process. And that's what Kerry is hoping, is that this invitation to talk about military to military will open up an opportunity. And that we could cooperate with the Russians on that, as we did on Iran. So, one, it's the EU, the European migrant crisis is driving it. And 2, a growing concern that, in fact, Assad and everybody other than ISIS is losing control completely of northern Syria, and that the thing is just getting completely out of hand.
For the record, what is it that Russia says it is actually, they say that they're actually doing here?
They say they are there. And they've always had a base in Syria. This is not new. And they like
advisors, not military.
Well, they've got, I don't know the details of that, but this is totally different. The base is being expanded. There were even reports by Reuters, which no one would confirm to me, that Russia's already flying surveillance drones over Syria. So what they want to make sure doesn't happen is that essentially Assad gets this tremendous help from the Russians and turns around and uses it against his own citizens, barrel bombing them, as Assad is doing now.
It sounds almost, and tell me if this is too simplistic, like a pool game, that on one hand,
Yes.
the migrant crisis is pushing them toward Russia, but they are afraid that Russia may have a bank shot, which takes them back toward Assad. Does that make any sense?
I couldn't have said it better. I couldn't have said it better. That's exactly it. And as you say, the track record is such that there's no reason for President Obama to believe President Putin anyway.
So who holds the cue, just following through on that?
I don't know. Probably Putin, as he manages to do. Obviously, he's trying to get out of the deep freeze he's been in with the rest of the world over Ukraine. And the U.S. does not really want to be an enabler to that. At the same time, they want to learn more about the military operations. So the administration, it strikes me, is a little bit caught. And then you also always have Secretary Kerry, who, having completed the Iran deal, some people say maybe just looking for another great negotiation, he can get going.
Well, there's plenty out there left to be done, but one last thing. So next week is the United Nations General Assembly. This is where any meeting between the president and President Putin would likely occur.
Yes.
Where does that stand?
There is
actual face-to-face of leaders.
There is debate and discussion in the White House over this, I'm told. It is very much in the air. Kerry and Lavrov will obviously talk, probably extensively and several times in a bilateral, just the two of them. So I would not be a bit surprised if Presidents Obama and Putin were to meet.
And there will be a pool cue in the corner waiting to see
Yes.
who picks it up. Margaret Warner, thank you very much.
Thanks, Gwen.